Hello and welcome to another HanDrinksSolo wine info video. And today we are discussing the Van Wyk family wines Elgin Syrah, made by winemaker Justin Van Wyk. Now, Justin is currently the cellarmaster at Constantia Glen, and he's also the previous recipient of the Diners Club Winemaker of the Year award. He's an enormously versatile winemaker, and his own range of Van Wyk family wines features everything from Riesling through to Syrah, to Southern Rhone blends, to Chenin Blanc, to Cape White blends. Justin's Elgin Syrah forms part of the HanDrinksSolo's dip into some of the cooler Syrah sites around South Africa. If you have energy for it, at the end of this video, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time digging into the science of Rotundones and why this group of chemicals makes South Africa's cooler climate Syrahs taste so special. But for now, I just want to focus on why this particular Syrah tastes so special. If we look at the alcohol levels of this wine, we'll notice that it's only at 13%. Which means we can deduce that probably this Syrah was harvested a little bit earlier than some of the other cooler climate Syrahs that we've been exploring in the last month or so. As a result, we might expect the flavor spectrum of this wine to be more in the red fruit zone as opposed to in the riper black fruit zone that you might expect from a 14.5% or a 15% alcohol Syrah. The fruit for this wine was sourced from Elgin orchards, and it was taken from vineyards that were planted in the late 90s, which means they're now roughly 25 years old. Justin then carts the fruit from Elgin back to the Constantia Glen cellar, where he ferments 50% of the grapes as whole bunches, and the other 50% he destems and crushes the berries prior to fermentation. Now, the differences between a whole bunch component and a crushed berry component really can be quite distinct. For example, in a whole bunch component, you may find a much more pronounced peppery note to the wine. And this is largely because the level of rotundones in grape stems is far higher than it is in grape skins. Conversely, on a crushed berry component, you may find that the wine has a much richer color, has far more volatile aromatics, and has a higher tannin level, because the act of crushing the grapes and breaking the skins and allowing fruit seeds and skins in order to mix together during fermentation, you give more space and surface area for extraction to take place during fermentation. After the fermentation of these really two quite different components, Justin then blends the two and matures them for about 16 months in French oak. So now that we know how the wine is made, let's get into the glass to see if the theory matches up with what we taste and smell. Having given it a sniff, it really is textbook Syrah. So the fruit components are these lush, ripe blackberries, and then there's also a hint of red cherry and perhaps even some Lifesaver style red cherry candy. And then you have those classic textbook accents that go with the fruit component in a Syrah. So you have the white pepper element, you have rocket leaf herbal spicy thing where you're not quite sure whether it's herbs or spice, and then you have black olive tapenade, all working together. And then remember, the wine was also matured in oak for 16 months, which explains why you do have the presence of sweeter vanilla spice and even some really quite interesting star anise notes. And when we take a sip, well, we really can be quite proud of ourselves for predicting that the wine would be very much in the red fruit zone. Because while there are those components of juicy blackberry that we mentioned, over the top of that is this really beautiful, pristine red cherry acidity, maybe even moving further along the spectrum into sort of tart raspberry notes. And then that pepper, which we thought was pronounced on the aromas, I think it's even more pronounced on the palate. As a whole, it really is a beautifully balanced wine. But what I want to do now is zero in on those pepper elements that we've been discussing in the wine, because we now know that these flavors and aromas are triggered by a group of chemicals called rotundones. Here are 6 facts about rotundones, which may make your next glass of Syrah or Mourvedre or even Gruner Veltliner just that little bit more interesting. Fact 1. For a very long time, the world's best Shirazes have been correlated with a very distinct black or white pepper note. But it was only as late as 2008 that Australian researchers were able to identify with certainty that it was in fact a group of chemicals called rotundones that were responsible for this pepper-like aroma. Unsurprisingly, white pepper and black pepper also have very high levels of rotundones. Fact 2. The correlation between cool climate Syrah and far more obvious levels of pepper in a wine had puzzled researchers for a very long time, until it was discovered that solar radiation in a vineyard is indirectly correlated with high levels of Rotundones in those same vines. This means that in a southern hemisphere country like South Africa, a south-facing vineyard is far more likely to have high levels of Rotundones in the grapes and leaves and stems of those vines. Conversely, if you're a winemaker who hates peppery Shiraz, you can either pick a north-facing slope, or you can spend a lot more time with your viticultural team cutting leaves away from the fruit zone to make sure that those grapes get as much sun on them as possible, thereby obliterating most of your Rotundone levels in the grape skins. Fact 3, it's not just direct sunlight or solar radiation that can reduce Rotundone levels, but it's temperature too. Researchers noted that ambient temperatures of 25 degrees or above in those final ripening phases is enough to reduce Rotundone levels quite markedly in the harvested grapes. Fact 4, Rotundones are in fact at their highest concentration in the leaves of the vines. The next most highest concentration is in the stems on grape bunches, and it's grape skins that are only third on the podium. This partially explains why a whole bunch fermentation in Syrah often leads to wines that have far more distinct or obvious pepper elements to them. Fact 5, the grape with the highest concentration of Rotundones, and this is more than 10 times higher than Syrah, is that of the Italian grape of Vespolina, which is planted mostly in Piedmont in northern Italy. Now, Syrah may be reported as having roughly 500 to 600 nanograms of Rotundones per kilogram of grapes. Vespolina has been known to have 5,000 to 6,000 nanograms of Rotundones per kilogram of grapes. Finally, fact 6, and perhaps we should have started with this one, because as high as 20 to 25% of the general population is completely anosmic to Rotundones, i.e. they cannot taste or smell them, which means that as many as 1 in 4 of you have absolutely no idea what I've been talking about all this time. So that's all we have time for today. But if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon and subscribe to the HanDrinksSolo YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 videos each month talking about wine science, wine history, unusual cultivars, and some of the rising winemaking stars coming out of the South African winelands.